Hi, I'm Rob Palmatier, one of the co-authors of the textbook Marketing Strategy Based on First Principles in Data Analytics. Today's session is going to go through chapter 7 of the book, and we're talking about market principle 3, which is that all competitors react, so you must manage sustainable competitive advantage. We looked at 3 types of sustainable competitive advantage that marketing often uses to build barriers around your business. Brands, offering, and relationships. Today's session will be about using relationships to build sustainable competitive advantage. For an agenda, I'm going to go through first an introduction of relationship marketing, and then I'm going to go through relationship marketing strategy. And we're going to break this up into strategies for building and maintaining relationships, for targeting and adapting relationship marketing efforts, as well as relational dynamics and lifecycle strategies. Managing relational-based sustainable advantage, finally, and also what are the steps for doing that, as well as building relational equity. Relationship marketing basics. So what is relationship marketing? Relationship marketing really is a process that namely identifies, develops, maintains, and terminates relationship in order to produce relationship equity. So in this case, because relationships are such a strong source of sustainable competitive advantage, there's a whole area around it called relationship marketing. So it's given kind of its own name. This form of equity, in combination with brands and offering, allows a firm to build sustainable competitive advantage or build a barrier around their business. Relationship and branding often build on top of offering equity. So the 3 often go together. Customer relationship management is another term that often overlaps. So let me define that. It is a managerially relevant, organizational-wide, customer-focused application. So it's applying relationship marketing, but using IT to achieve firm performance. So very often you're going to hear firms talk about their CRM system. CRM system, customer relationship management system, is usually a system they buy, something like Salesforce.com or Oracle or Microsoft Dynamics. A system they buy to collect customer data so then they can better build relationships with them. So relationships has been a form of sustainable competitive advantage way before we ever even talked about business. It can be tracked all the way back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, where in Homer, Greece, the way that exchanges were managed, there was no contracts in many cases, there was no court. It was managed based on the relationship and trust between people. So if you looked at things like on the Silk Trail, where spices and silk products and such were taken from Asia and shipped into Europe, they were handed off from person to person, all based on personal relationships. Most early brands were actually people's names, because initially the business started, exchanges were managed with relationships. If you think of small town, you're in this old village, and a farmer brings produce into the retail store, the little shop, they sell to people. All of that was managed with relationships. During the industrial age, when these firms expanded, and they no longer sold the people they knew, then they took their name and they made it into their brand. Things like Rothschild, Tiffany, JCPenney, these were all family names. There was an interesting study done on the impact of relationships versus advertising. They found the impact on sales was about twice relationships. For every dollar you spent building relationships, things like hiring salespeople and such, had a bigger impact than a dollar spent on advertising. And why is that? Well, one, there is an advantage to a firm of advertising versus sales, hiring salespeople. If they want to cut back on advertising, you can do that within a month or 2. If you want to cut back on selling, to let salespeople go or to fire salespeople is a very expensive proposition. It takes many months. So the idea that advertising is more of a variable cost allows them to make firms more comfortable spending money in that area. Another reason why relationship marketing works so well, psychologists have found that nearly 1/3 of your brain, so we carry this brain around, we have to feed it, we have to keep it at the right temperature. There's a cost to doing that. There was in the past an evolutionary cost to having, if you will, such a big brain. But there was benefits. Why do we use 1/3 of our brain on relationships? It makes us much more survivable. The evolutionary psychologists argue that because we can cooperate, and that's what relationships are really there for, is to help us cooperate, it makes us much more survivable. Because when you're hungry and I get some food, I can give you some later, maybe a month or two later. I need some food, you can share with me. Maybe some type of food is too hard to get, or we have to protect ourselves from enemies, and we only can do that if we cooperate. And so the reason we have relationship marketing work so well is we're hardwired in many ways on these relationships. And you'll see that in some of the research we're going to go through. So relationship marketing builds customer equity. So let's go through this. Market principle 3, focus on building and maintaining barriers or sustain a competitive advantage to attack. Relationship equity refers to the aggregation of relational assets and liabilities associated with the firm's boundary-spanning employees and social networks that add to or subtract from the value of the firm. So one thing we've seen is we see people will sometimes pass one Starbucks and go to a second Starbucks to get their coffee from somebody they know. Exact same product. Why? Because they have a relationship with that person, even though the relationship may be very minor. People will go across town to get their hair cut from their favorite hairstylist. Why? Yeah, maybe the haircut's fine, but I bet they could get it closer of the same quality, but because they have a relationship with that person. So very often relationships will trump almost all other things. This was a meta-analysis. The way results from a meta-analysis. The way a meta-analysis works is we took over 20 years of research that studied 38,000 relationships across hundreds of different researchers, and we mathematically combined all the results. And we found, and this R equals 0.61, what this is a correlation coefficient that's been sample size adjusted and correlation coefficient adjusted. And we find that relationships really drive as a very strong of impact, 0.61. If it was 1, it meant they're perfect. -1 means a perfect opposite. 0 is like no correlation. But word of mouth comes from having good relationships. If you want somebody in your business to refer you to somebody else, you need to have a good relationship. Why? Because they're putting their own reputation at risk, saying, hey, go buy from this guy. He's a really good guy. They put my own, if I have a relationship with you, I'm putting my reputation behind that. If it works out badly for you, you'll think badly of me. And I'm going to get no financial benefit of it. So usually you'll only do that if you have a relationship with the other party. It also drives loyalty, and it drives objective performance. The reason objective performance is less is very often you'd like to buy from a friend, but they don't have the right product, they're not in the right area, the price might be wrong, so there's other factors that would stop it. There's also a number of trends that is making relationship marketing more effective. Let's go through that. Aging population. Well, come to find out, research shows that relationships are more important to people as they age. Think of your parents or your grandparents. What do you think is the most important thing to them? Will they make a lot of sacrifices to spend time with their friends and family? Yes. When you're young, typically those relationships aren't as important. They become more important as you age. So the population in the US and in many other developed countries is aging. So in that case, relationships become more important. Increased global competition, especially Me Too commodification. In the past, I could design a new product, maybe do R&D, come out with a new product, launch it to the market, and somebody might not copy me for 1 to 2 years. So I would have 2 years of being the only supplier of this new innovative product, and I could recoup my financial investments. Now in many markets, people have got very quick at copying, less than 6 months. So you don't have very long to use your innovation as a sustainable competitive advantage. Relationships are much more lasting. Firms are looking for additional sources of SCA and high marketing. In many cases, they're finding advertising is saturated. What I mean by that is you're getting hit with so many advertising on TV, online, on billboards, whatever, that you're no longer paying attention to the advertisement. But relationships still penetrate, still have meaning to you. The shift to service economies is a big driver of relationship marketing. Services are intangible because you can't evaluate it. There's risk in it. Because of that, you want a relationship with the person providing it so you can trust them. And you use that trust to manage that risk. What would you think about hiring somebody to take care of your children, a nanny, let's say, and every day they send a new person? You would say, wow, no way I'm going to do that. I want to know the person. I want to interview. I want to build a relationship with that person. Very often, people who take care of your kids, you build a very strong relationship. That helps you manage the risk because it's intangible on how well they're taken care of. You can't see it. But if you're buying gasoline, probably any gasoline station, pretty much you see it as a commodity. It doesn't really matter who you buy it from. You don't need a relationship. So as you buy more intangible services, you want more of a relationship. Relationship marketing is more important. So that's a little bit of introduction on what relationship marketing is and why it's important. Now we're going to go through how do you use it to build and maintain relationships. It's interesting. You can go all the way back to Adam Smith and say the sentiment was most immediately and directest prompts us to reward is gratitude. Gratitude is a very small, important emotion. It's interesting. Evolutionary psychologists have shown that have argued anyway, that it helps us cooperate. So let's see how it helps us cooperate. If I meet a person and I give them something, what do they feel? They feel the emotion of gratitude. If they don't feel the emotion of gratitude, it's actually a sign of psychosis. Your brain is not working correct. So if I give you something, you feel gratitude. That's an emotional response. You feel a need to reciprocate. If you can reciprocate back to me, give me something back, even in the lowest case, it's thank you, saying thank you. Endorphins are released in your brain and you feel pleasure. So this emotion that's hardwired in our head, this is 1/3 of our brain that helps you manage relationship, is a catalyst for starting relationships. Because I do something for you, you reciprocate back to me, we start building reciprocity norms, and we have a tighter relationship. The advantage of that, if we divided the room in half, this half were all psychotic and they did not feel gratitude, this half felt gratitude, and we put ourselves back in the Stone Age, let's see what happens and why the evolutionary psychologists argue this makes this group more survivable. What would happen is if one person's hungry, let's say they did share some food with somebody next to them, but that person doesn't feel gratitude, doesn't feel any need to reciprocate. A month later, when its roles are reversed and the other person's hungry, they don't reciprocate back. So that person dies, and now, again, when somebody's hungry, that person can't share. On this side of the room, somebody's hungry, somebody else shares with them, they feel a need to reciprocate. The next time its roles are reversed, they reciprocate. They go through that. Ultimately, they have a cooperative group all working together. Come to find out, we're very good at tracking who owes who what. So not only is when I give you something, do you feel gratitude and need to reciprocate? If you don't reciprocate, if you do, you feel pleasure, endorphins are released, but if you don't reciprocate, you feel guilt. And it's a nagging guilt that you say, I really need to help that person out. I'm sure everybody in this room at some time has said, oh, that person has done so much for me, let me help them out. Maybe you'll buy them a present at some time, bring them back from a trip or something and give it to them to thank them for their efforts. There's actually a famous study on Cokes and raffle tickets that I'm going to describe because it'll help everybody remember this. The way it works is this. Very often we use students in our research, and this was in a psychology lab, and they had a student come in and going to get extra credit, part of the study, but didn't realize they were part of this study. And as they're sitting there waiting for what they thought was the study to start, they already were involved, there was a person behind the counter, a graduate student, and he walked out of the room and came back and gave them a soft drink. He said, I was going to buy a soft drink, a Coca-Cola for myself, and I got one for you because you were waiting. The person says, oh, that's nice, thank you. That was the gift. The person goes, does some unrelated study, filling out a survey. When they're coming back, waiting for part 2, the person that gave him the Coke says, oh, by the way, my son's selling some raffle tickets. Would you be interested in buying any? The raffle ticket costs the same amount as a Coca-Cola. How many more raffle tickets does a person buy if they're giving that random Coke in the beginning versus the people that weren't? And they randomly assigned it. So some people got Coke, some people not. And then they compared how many raffle tickets. Guess how many more raffle tickets? Well, I kind of say up there. Usually 3 times more. But if you know about this, you can actually manage it so you can get 5, 6, 7 times more then. So for one investment of a Coke, they buy 3 times more raffle tickets. Obviously, from a marketing standpoint, that works. It's interesting that this characteristics of gratitude is hardwired in our brain. It's one of the reasons relationship marketing works so well, because it's built into us. We can't really avoid it. Here's a model on a research project, and we want to show you how you can get more money, how you can make gratitude work for you more. So here's relationship marketing investment. This could be like giving somebody a Coke, taking them to lunch, whatever. When you give somebody a gift like that, it makes them trust you more. It makes them more committed. Commitment also drives them buying from you. So that doesn't involve gratitude. That's more of the, we'll call it the cognitive end of your brain. Because they give you something, you say, okay, that person is treating me nice, so I trust them more. And because they're giving me more value in that gift, I'll buy from them because maybe they'll give me more value in the future. Non-emotional. Now let's turn to gratitude, feelings of gratitude. When I give the gift, they feel gratitude, they need to reciprocate, they reciprocate, and that generates business. But guess what? There's many characteristics that can make that investment pay larger dividends than just 1 to 3. All of these things in the box: free will, motive, risk, and need. And let me explain how that works. Let's say you go into a car dealership and the car salesman comes down and they say, oh, it's a cold day out today. Would you like a cup of coffee or cappuccino? And they said, yeah, that would be nice. So the car salesperson goes in and brings them a cup of coffee. Now, they're obviously not going to buy the car for the cup of coffee, but maybe if they're looking at 2 dealerships, they might come back, or they're looking at multiple salesperson, they might come back to that salesperson. However, let's say the customer walks to the restroom, and on their way, they look over the coffee shop, and they see a sign that says, remember, all customers must get free coffee. Do you think the gratitude is less? Yes. It wasn't given out of free will. That was a requirement. Come to find out, if they think you're giving the gift out of free will, it generates more gratitude. Let's look at motive. Very often, firms will tell you their salespeople are not on commission. Come to find out, if a salesperson helps you and they're not on commission, you feel more gratitude for them helping you than if they're on commission. If they give it to you when it's if they help you out when it's risk to themselves, like, oh I'm not supposed to tell you this, and then they give you something. If they do that, it makes you feel more gratitude. Last, let's say you really need something. You spill something on your shirt, you're going to an interview. You only have 5 minutes to shop. If a salesperson runs over and helps you get a new shirt really quickly, you're going to feel more gratitude than if you weren't on the way to a job interview. You're just shopping for a shirt. Come to find out, how you deliver that cup of coffee or whatever else you're doing has a large impact on how much gratitude you feel. So very often when you're designing programs to build relationships, you have to take this into account on how you're delivering it. Together, they determine the effectiveness of the relationship marketing. Here's another study. We looked at 3 types of programs. Relationship marketing that were completely social, just taking somebody to lunch. Another one that were structural. Let's say I give my best customers a 1-800 number they can call. If you're a high level, let's say a diamond medallion flyer on Delta Airlines, they give you a special 1-800 number to call. The people on that answer that phone are their best trained people, and they really work hard to solve your problems. They have a lot of people, so that phone number answers quicker than the normal Delta 1-800 number. That would be a structural. I gave one of my customers some structural way they could deal with me differently. The last one is, let's say I say, after you buy 5 plane tickets, I give you a free plane ticket. That's a financial incentive. What did we find on which of these programs drove performance? We found the biggest impact came from social programs. For every $1 invested, we got $1.80 back in this study. So social is the best way to do relationship marketing, which kind of makes sense because it's interpersonal. Structural, about broke even. Or if customers were a very high frequency customer, it would generate $1.20 for every $1 spent. We never found a positive ROI on discounts. I would argue financial relationship marketing should be thought of as price discounts, not as a way to build relationships. In all of our research, we find that giving money to people changes the dynamics of the relationship and undermines relationship building. So you'd be better to stick to social and structural programs. However, now, that example I went before and what I've talked about so far are all to individual people. But very often, sales are occurring between two firms. We call that business to business or interfirm. So here's a selling firm and here's a customer firm. In this case, we have to take a few more things into account. Each of these are a person on the selling firm, let's say a salesperson, a product manager, an engineering. Over here, you might have a buyer, a quality manager, somebody in manufacturing. And they could have multiple relationships. So in this case, we have to expand our thinking beyond just trust, commitment, and gratitude. And we want to look at how many people you know. We call that contact density. So how many different people do you know at the buying firm? And who do you know? Does that person have authority? Do you know the CEO or do you know the janitor? Well, if you're selling CRM software, maybe the CFO, CEO can get involved. If you're selling other products, maybe the janitor is the right person to talk to. So what we found is all three of these matter. How many people you know, the quality of the relationship you have at each one, trust, commitment, gratitude, as well as who you know. This is kind of a social network perspective when there's many people involved in the relationship, not just one. So maintaining relationships. So that we talked about building. Building relationships a lot revolves around building gratitude and leading trust, commitment. You want to build those bonds. In a B2B case, you want to make it broad. Maintaining is often about preventing negatives. Is it surprising to anyone that you can end a relationship quicker than you can build a relationship? It shouldn't. Very easy to damage things, much easier than to build things. Long-term relationship marketing success depends more on preventing the bad than promoting the good in many cases. Negative activities, in one study we did, had twice the effect of positive activities. But surprisingly, sometimes firms engage in activities that actually poison their own customers' relationships. And let me go through an example of that. United Airlines. United Airlines used a contractual policy. I don't know if you know this story, but what happened was this. A musician was getting on a United flight, and he was looking out the window when he was making a connection, and he saw them toss or damage their guitar case. Ended up, the only thing United would pay for was the outside part of the case. They would not fix the $5,000 guitar that was damaged. And they said, oh, look at the contract. This is what the contract says. So they used the contract to do something that probably is unfair. Most people would say that was unfair. So this person got upset, this musician, and he makes a little video, puts it on YouTube called United Breaks My Guitar. As of 2014, 14 million views were done, and that 14 million views of that video cost United Airlines $180 million in negative PR. You notice how people want to punish other people when they treat them unfairly. And they'll go to long-term efforts to try to punish the firm for what they get treated. So we came to understand that. We know negative behaviors has a negative impact. People seek explanations for negative impacts. That's part of our psychology. And if you're treated unfairly, you'll do a lot of work to try to punish the person that treats you unfairly. I went through the United Airlines example, but let me go through another one, Starbucks. A person bought 2 cappuccino machines at a Starbucks around Thanksgiving time. They were advertising, buy these for Christmas presents. He bought 2. Gave them out as Christmas gifts. After Christmas Day, they opened them up. They had both been used. Obviously, if you give a Christmas gift, you don't want them to be used. The guy said, no, don't worry about it. I'll take them back and get you new ones. The guy takes them back to Starbucks. Said, I want to return these for new ones. And they said, oh, I'm sorry. Our return policy is only good for 30 days. He says, but it's not fair because you were advertising this for a Christmas gift and Thanksgiving. Obviously, they wouldn't have known it before Christmas. They said, sorry, that's our rules. Come to find out, this was a rich venture capital guy. He bought a 2-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, slamming Starbucks about it. So people go to a lot of effort to respond to unfairness. Again, the evolutionary psychologists have a reason for this. If you don't punish people when they treat you unfairly, or you only punish them for that little event, It makes sense for people to be unfair. Let's go back to our example earlier where we were talking about somebody being hungry and they were sharing their food because you shared me some food in the past, I want to reciprocate and I'm going to share with you. Let's say one of the people in that group got some food. He knew there was people hungry back at the camp, but they stay out in the woods and they eat all that food themselves and they don't share it. Or maybe they even take some. If somebody catches them, they need to punish them severely. If they only say, oh, we're not going to give you food the next time, the person might calculate and say, wow, I can cheat 10 times, I only get caught once. So 9 times a lot better than the punishment I get for once, so I'm going to go cheat. It makes sense to cheat. It's the same reason if somebody cheats on a test and the only penalty is you're going to get a 0 on this test, people might say, geez, I'm going to cheat 10 times or maybe even retake the test. If I cheat 10 times and only get caught once, it makes sense. I'll get 9 tests are really good and 1 I just have to redo or I get a 0. So we're wired to really have a strong response to unfairness. That's why we call it relationship acid. Here is a study we did on it, and I want to show why unfairness is so bad. A big part of maintaining relationships is preventing unfairness. So in a business-to-business relationship, you might have conflict over price. You might say, I want to pay $5. I say, no, you got to pay $7. And we might argue about that a little bit. That can have a negative effect on cooperation and flexibility. But we're kind of expecting that negative effect. It's not very strong. Opportunism is the idea of a salesperson taking a little advantage of you, maybe not telling you something that would make you not buy the product. Again, you kind of expect that. It does have a negative effect, but it's not very strong. However, if the salesperson or the firm treats you unfairly, this negative effect is not only bigger than both of these, but it makes these other negative effects worse. It aggravates it. Let me explain that. If I argue about price a little bit, in itself, that doesn't have that much of a negative effect. But if you treated me unfairly in the past, and I think you're always an unfair person, this little conflict in price, people will say, you always do this. You always try to take advantage of me and treat me unfairly. That makes that little bit of price negotiation have a lot bigger negative effect. So unfairness hurts in its own right, and it makes everything else going on in the relationship worse, more negative. It undermines cooperation and it undermines flexibility and hurts performance. This is where contract utilization comes in. Sometimes in business you use contracts to manage some of these issues. You might manage conflict by putting a contract in place that we negotiate, and we say, I'm going to give you a 5% discount each year, so then we don't have to negotiate about it anymore. We just know you're going to get a 5% discount. So contracts help suppress conflict and opportunism, but guess what? This positive sign means it aggravates unfairness. Even though the lawyers might have negotiated a contract or written a contract, both Starbucks and United, when they tried to use their contract to enforce something that was unfair, it still did a lot of damage. I would argue in business to business, in relationships in the business world, you should not use contracts to manage them if you want to have strong relationships. Only put the contract as a back shell in the emergency situation where you're going to break up. So in a way, think of contracts as a way to understand how you're going to break up, not as a way to manage the contract or manage the relationship day to day. However, firms often expose themselves to some unfairness. Lost customer analysis sometimes says, why did you leave? And somebody said, because they treated me unfair. They treated me unfairly. That punishment is allowing the person to overcome the exit barriers. They're going to take all the energy and cost it takes to switch to a new firm. Also, loyalty programs often treat people unfairly. And let me go through and show you how that works. Here's a model. I'm going to walk through this model and show you. This is about loyalty programs. We're going to use an airline as an example. So an airline has a loyalty program. They might give you a priority check-in, they might let you go to the lounge, they might give you priority boarding, or all sorts of other types of reward. They give those rewards to their targeted customers, people in their loyalty program. So let's think, target customers here. If I give you priority boarding, it makes you feel gratitude, That's going to make the target have a positive feeling. It's going to make them more loyal, and they're going to buy more product. If I let them walk on the airplane first, maybe I even let them walk on a red carpet. They walk on the red carpet, they get to see themselves getting on first ahead of all the other people watching them. That makes them feel more status, and that has a positive effect on target's loyalty and also a positive effect on firm performance. However, what many firms ignore is, what about all the people who are watching? When you let somebody board the airplane early, there's a bystander. The bystander, all the people standing there watching. What happens to their status when they get made to go on the plane last? Well, guess what? It has a negative effect because it makes them feel badly. It also makes them sometimes seem just unfair. Why does that person get to go on the plane earlier? Why are they getting some special deal? One airline had this program they did that was really bad. What they would do is, if you were a high mileage flyer for them, but you did not get upgraded and you're in coach, they would walk down the aisle, find the person before they took off, and give them a free drink coupon and say, I'm sorry we weren't able to upgrade you today. Here's a free drink coupon. But what do you think the two people sitting next to that person feel? In a way, they could be running through their mind, oh, he has to sit back with us so he gets a drink? What about me? It made him feel unfair. So very often these programs can have a negative effect. And what we learned earlier, negatives have a lot bigger magnitude than these positives. Now, how you deliver the program also matters. The visibility of the program. In some airports now, they're allowing the first class and premium mileage flyers to go into a lounge and board the plane from the lounge so nobody can see them. They're going to go in a different boarding gate. Why do they do that? With low visibility, it suppresses the unfairness. The people don't get to see it. You can also clarify the rules. If you clarify the rules, it can also help or in some cases even hurt. For example, if I made an announcement and said, for all the people who have not been home for 100 days this year, let's let them get on the plane early. That probably would suppress people's feeling of unfairness because they say, oh, they have a reason to get on. But if they made an announcement that said something like, all the customers I really like, you get to go on good, you get to go on first, the rest of you, just sit there and wait. Obviously, how they communicate the rules are going to matter a lot. This is a study. This is the second part of this same study. We did it for 5 airline programs. We looked at 3 different parts of the program. Priority check-in, that's at like the ticket counter. Priority boarding is actually when you get on the plane, and some free services. We looked at the impact on sales of 3 different mechanisms. Let's look at the first one, priority check-in. The target customer has about a 5% lift, that dark purple, because of feelings of gratitude on priority check-in. They have higher status. Oh, excuse me, I spoke wrong. The light purple is the gratitude. The dark purple is status. The bystander has negative status and unfairness. So obviously the target's lifted more than the bystander, but there's probably a lot more bystanders. Now I recognize that targets might be more important customers with bigger sales. So in some cases you might be fine with that. But let's look at this one. This one's really bad for the firm. Priority boarding. You don't get very much lift for the target, but look at all the negative for a bystander. That is not a good program the airlines have, and they know that. That's why they're building these gates where people can board without seeing it. They can't just remove it because removing things would even be worse for the targets. Even though the targets aren't that excited about getting it, they'd be very upset about losing it. Free services has a very good profile for the firm. It has status, it has a lot of gratitude, but not much effect on bystanders. Probably not much of effect because they don't see it. Another thing that hurts on the priority boarding is a lot of people are bystanders. Even people who get the board in the second group were bystanders for the first group. The third group were bystanders for the first and second group. And we know negatives have a bigger effect. So in a lot of cases, most everybody except the first person on the plane is a bystander. So again, that's one of the reasons why the bystander effect is so negative. Overall, this study showed 60% of the lift comes from gratitude, 70% of the drop comes from unfairness. A takeaway, we kind of call it the twin pillars of relationship marketing, are gratitude and unfairness. Okay, let's go on. We want to look at targeting relationship marketing program. Do you think relationship marketing works the same over the whole world? Well, come to find out, no. We know international trade is getting bigger and bigger. And what we did is we looked at a meta-analysis again of 144 research papers around the world from 29 countries, 43,000 relationships across 82% of the global GDP. And we found US ranked 16 of the top 25 countries on the effect of relationship marketing. Relationship marketing actually works better outside the US market than it does inside the US. It especially works in developing countries, sometimes called BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Relationship marketing is 55% more effective in BRIC countries than they are in the US. This graph kind of shows it. What I show here is we made the US average 0, and we looked at every firm, were they above or below the US on the effectiveness of relationship marketing, on the impact of strong relationships on performance. Would we find the lowest country? Overall, we're 11%, outside is 11% higher. Relationships have the largest effect in mainland China. 100%, twice as big. Why is that? Well, some of it might be the type of culture, collectivism, individualism, and things like that. But part of it also is, do we trust the contract system in China maybe? Maybe there's not as much institutional trust. They don't have as many developed systems. I mean, in many cases in the US, we have too many courts and lawyers and law systems. Everybody's taking everybody to court. But maybe the China was a little bit less. But however the reason, bottom line is that relationships matter more. Very often people will only want to buy from somebody they have a relationship. What countries are lower? Netherlands and Norway at minus 37%. Relationships matter less. Okay, next we want to manage relational-based sustainable competitive advantage. The process of building relationship equity consists of two main steps. The first, a firm needs to build a strong foundation that supports building and maintaining. You can't do relationship marketing until first you build and maintain relationships. With this foundation, a firm can begin to implement relationship marketing and loyalty programs. So those would be kind of the two main steps, if you will. First, you build and maintain. Part of maintaining is preventing the negatives. After you do the basics, then you would go maybe implement some loyalty programs, kind of like rewards programs airlines have, hotels have, in order to increase switching costs, give people extra benefits as they try to achieve higher goals. And you do those typically for specific outcomes. So let's go through step one in more detail, developing a strong foundation. The first thing you have to do is make sure you're not having unresolved unfairness and conflict. Negatives hurt way more. Do your lost customer analysis and find out if people are leaving because you're doing something that's unfair. It's counterproductive to increase relationship marketing budgets without first fixing the problems. The individual boundary spanner, your salespeople, your customer service people are sometimes your best employees for building relationships. One of the reasons Starbucks does not use franchise systems, they hire employees, they give them health care, they give them retirement plans, they give them educational programs. Why? They want to hire good employees so that they do a good job dealing with customers. Because so many drivers, our customer relationship revolve around boundary spanners. Boundary spanners is the name of these customer service people or salespeople. Normally, you want to put a lot of your money into selecting, training, and motivating these people. Only by having those people good. Have you ever been into an organization where you could just tell the employees didn't care? They'd be talking behind the counter and they're ignoring you. They just don't really bother. Well, obviously, if you get that kind of environment, they're not going to be building good relationship. Other times you see employees out there all motivated together trying to help customers and maybe coming out around the counter to help people, cleaning up the store. Just you could see the culture is such that the employees want to help. Increasing the amount, frequency, and quality of communication can also be effective. Obviously, you want to communicate with them and communicate with them effectively. Step 2 is implementing loyalty programs. Different programs build different types of relational ties. We found that the 2 best types of tie are social and structural programs. Not many financial programs work well. Onboarding. Onboarding is what you do when a customer first starts with your firm. Research has shown if you reach out to the customer in that first month and build a relationship, it can last and reduce retention up to 50% a year later. Why? Because that's your initial formation. We often say first impressions. Well, it seems like first impressions matter when you're looking at relationship marketing programs. Use surprise and gratitude. Gratitude, we talked about a lot. I didn't mention surprise. Let me talk about that a little bit. One of the things you want to do in your program, you want to make a little element of the program random. And what do I mean by that? If I post all the rules of the program and you know what you're doing and you're saving in your, let's say, an airline program and you're flying miles and you're accumulating points, and then you cash in those points to fly on a free flight, you don't feel as much gratitude. Why? Because you said that was part of the plan. That was part of the program. When I bought, it was almost like part of the price was I'm going to get some free miles. So what firms are learning is that they need to keep some of their programs, I'll call it secret, not publicize them, and give people gifts and surprises that they're not expecting. Because if you expect something and you work for it, you don't feel much gratitude when you get it. But if it's not part of the rules and you're surprised with it, you generate more gratitude. So surprise is going to be an increasing element of programs in the future. You want to be careful of the effects on bystanders. I know your target customers are your most important, but remember, nearly every target customer is a bystander in the beginning. So even though you might earn most of your money from people in your target customers, you don't want it to have a negative effect on the bystander customers, because these are all your customers, and some of those bystanders are probably going to move up and become good customers in the future. And now we're seeing a lot of shift in these loyalty programs and relationship marketing programs to make them hidden. In other words, they have them, but they don't publicize them. Ritz-Carlton gives every employee $2,000 discretionary authority. If they have a problem, if a customer has a problem that they can solve with less than $2,000, any person, the person cleaning the room, the person behind the counter, person in the restaurant, they can solve the problem as long as it costs less than $2,000. It does a couple things. One, it makes motivates the employees to say, hey, this is what's important. Two, it puts everybody out there in the front line fixing problems. These programs are kind of hidden. They're not publicized because obviously they could be taken advantage of if they were. Okay, I want to go through, this is the last part of building sustainable competitive advantage. We went through brands, offering, relationships, so I want to put that back into our overall framework. We've already gone through this in one of the earlier sessions, but what have we talked about? What we've talked about over the last 3 sessions was building sustainable competitive advantage in order to have a barrier around our business using branding strategies, offering strategies, and relationship marketing. But this all fits into MP3, which takes inputs from MP1 and 2, does things like brand offering, relationship, equity stack. That just puts the 3 of them together, and that measures our total sustainable competitive advantage. Realize most firms just don't use just brands, just offering, just relationships. They use all 3. AIR strategies and BOR equity grids are tools to kind of make sense of this information. I'll go through here in a little bit more. And we also went through different types of analyses: experiments, conjoint, regression, and choice models. What do we get out of Market Principle 3? We get our SCAs, the ones we're going to use now and in the future. And we come out with our strategies on how we're going to use brands, offering, and relationships. So with that, I want to make the connection between the AIR strategy grid and the BOR equity grid. First, remember back to AIR strategy. This was really from Market Principle 2. We took our own customer portfolio and we segmented it across newly acquired customers, mid customers or expansion customers, and retention customers. And we clustered within each of those groups and we identified personas. And we said, what was the most effective strategy for each persona? By looking at different personas, it allowed us to take care of customer heterogeneity or market principle 1. By dividing it over time, it allowed us to take care of market principle 2 or customer dynamics, that all customers change. This feeds into the Bohr equity grid, which tells us what is our objective, advantage, and sustainability of this advantage, and how are we going to use brands, offering, and relationships to build SCA. Now, we not only use the input from what our personas want, we also have to take into account environmental trends, things like changes in technology. Is there any new disruptive technologies? Is there anything happening in the government that's changing regulation, maybe on energy efficiency? And maybe there's socioeconomic trends. People are just not as interested on bowling or doing certain type of entertainment anymore. They've moved on to different types of entertainment. That's how those fit together. The air strategy grid comes out of market principle 2. The equity grid comes out of market principle 3. So that ends up concluding chapter 7 on using relationships to build sustainable competitive advantage. And this really ends market principle 3. Thank you.